For years, the man known to millions simply as Tyrus stood in front of cameras and crowds without ever once mentioning the person who mattered most to him. He talked politics on national television, he talked wrestling, he talked about growing up hard and building himself into someone unbreakable. But there was one subject he kept locked away from the public for almost a decade, the woman who was quietly building a life with him behind the scenes. When the news finally broke that Tyrus had gotten married, fans everywhere had the same reaction. Wait, he's been with someone this whole time? And when they saw who she was, the surprise only grew. She wasn't a reality TV personality chasing cameras. She wasn't someone plucked from the entertainment world he'd spent his whole career in. She was a self-made entrepreneur who had rebuilt her own life from nothing, long before she ever crossed paths with a giant of a man from professional wrestling. To understand why this marriage means as much as it does, you have to go back to who Tyrus was before any of it. Born George Timothy Murdoch in Boston in 1973, he grew up biracial in a world that made him feel like he belonged fully to neither side of his family. That sense of being on the outside followed him into adulthood. He found an outlet in football, playing at the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and for a while it looked like sports might be his path forward. Then a ruptured appendix led to surgery that damaged nerves in his leg, leaving him with a permanent limp and no more football to lean on. It was the kind of setback that could have ended a lot of men's ambitions right there. Instead, Murdoch found his way into professional wrestling, signing with WWE in 2006 and grinding through the developmental system under names most fans have long forgotten. He reemerged in 2010 as Brodus Clay, a name and persona inspired by Snoop Dogg, for whom he'd once worked as a bodyguard. 2 years later, he was reinvented again as the Funkasaurus, a dancing, crowd-pleasing character built for smiles rather than intimidation. When WWE let him go in 2014, he was in his late 30s, without a contract and without a clear next step. Rather than walk away from wrestling altogether, he rebuilt himself once more, this time in total nonstop action and eventually the National Wrestling Alliance, competing under the name that fans know him by today. By 2021 and 2022, he had captured the NWA World Television Championship and then the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, closing out a wrestling career that had bent but never broken. While all of that was happening in the ring, Tyrus was also building a second career that would end up defining his public image even more than wrestling did. In 2016, Fox News host Greg Gutfeld brought him on as a guest commentator, and the chemistry was immediate. Tyrus became a regular presence on the Greg Gutfeld Show, later just called Gutfeld, as well as a contributor on other Fox programs. His blunt, unfiltered commentary made him a fan favorite in political media circles that had nothing to do with wrestling at all. By the early 2020s, he was hosting his own shows, writing best-selling books, and had become one of the more recognizable faces in cable news, all while most of his audience had no idea about the family waiting for him at home. That family started with a woman named Ingrid Rink. Born in April 1981 in the United States, Ingrid's early life looked nothing like the glossy world of television. She discovered fitness at 15 years old and was teaching classes by 16, turning discipline and structure into something she could control in a life that often felt anything but stable. She married young, to a man named Charlie Herbert, and the two had 2 sons together, Rhett and Rock. When that marriage fell apart, Ingrid found herself starting over as a single mother, and according to accounts she shared publicly, she was doing it with very little to fall back on financially. Then came the moment that changed everything. Her younger son Rock was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Overnight, Ingrid's focus shifted from running fitness classes to learning everything she could about nutrition, portion control, and how to keep her son healthy. She began preparing carefully measured meals for him, and when friends saw how well it was working, they started asking her to do the same for them. That request turned into Sensible Meals, a meal prep company built not out of some polished business plan, but out of a mother's need to protect her child. It grew into one of the more recognized names in the meal prep industry. And along the way, Ingrid also transformed her own body, reportedly losing well over 100 pounds through the very discipline she'd been building since she was a teenager. She later expanded into a broader lifestyle brand, the Rink Routine, blending yoga, movement, and holistic wellness into something entirely her own. Ingrid and Tyrus's paths crossed around 2014, and from the outside, they might have looked like an unlikely pairing. A towering wrestler turned television personality and a fitness entrepreneur raising two boys on her own. But by most accounts, what drew them together wasn't glamour, it was recognition. Both of them had already been through the kind of hardship that either breaks a person or reshapes them into something steadier. Tyrus carried the scars of childhood, spent feeling like he never fit anywhere, plus the physical toll of a career built on pain. Ingrid carried the exhaustion of rebuilding a life for herself and two children with almost nothing to start from. Neither of them needed convincing that the world could be difficult. What they found in each other was somebody who understood that without having to explain it. Their daughter, Georgie Jane Murdoch, was born in May 2014, and from that point on, the two of them were effectively raising a blended family of 5 children between them, even if the public wouldn't fully piece that together for years. Tyrus kept his personal life almost entirely off the air, a striking choice for a man who built a career on saying whatever was on his mind. For a long time, fans who followed him on Fox News had no idea he was a father, let alone that he'd been building a life with a partner and her 2 sons from a previous relationship. It wasn't until April 2020 that Tyrus put the speculation to rest, confirming publicly that he and Ingrid had already been married for some time. He didn't attach a date to it or make a big production out of the announcement. He simply said that after being married for years, he'd finally given her a proper proposal, adding that she deserved the world and that he considered it an honor she'd chosen him. That understated confirmation was about as much detail as fans got for a long time. The two continued living much of their life outside the spotlight, based for years in Mandeville, Louisiana, where they kept an unusual menagerie of exotic reptiles and pets alongside their children. Rhett, Ingrid's older son, graduated high school in 2021, an event she marked with a proud message online. Rock, her younger son, turned 16 that same year, still managing his diabetes with the discipline his mother had built her entire company around. Tyrus, for his part, had by then become something of a stepfather figure to both boys, even as his own 2 children from an earlier relationship remained almost entirely out of public view. Not everything about those years was easy. In 2019, Tyrus's career hit a serious obstacle when a former Fox News colleague, Britt McHenry, accused him of sexual harassment. Fox News stated the matter had been reviewed and resolved internally, but McHenry went on to file a lawsuit, which was ultimately dismissed in 2021 following an undisclosed settlement. It was a public and uncomfortable chapter, the kind that put a strain not just on Tyrus's career, but on his family as well. Ingrid largely stayed silent about it publicly, and when she eventually did address the toll it had taken, she kept her comments brief, saying only that the experience had been enormously difficult for her family, though it had also, in her words, shown her husband's strength as a leader for the people who depend on him. Whatever the private cost of that period, the couple stayed together through it, and by most accounts, it became one of the harder tests of their relationship, well before they ever made things official. By 2023, Tyrus was ready to close the chapter on wrestling entirely. At the National Wrestling Alliance's 75th anniversary event, he faced off against EC3 in a bull rope match with his own retirement on the line if he lost. He lost, and true to the stipulation, he walked away from the sport that had defined so much of his adult life. He later explained that the decision to stop wasn't really about the loss at all. It was about his kids telling him they wanted him at their games and their events instead of on the road. Whatever pull the ring had once had on him, it had clearly lost out to the pull of home. Then, on January 6th or 7, 2024, depending on the account, Tyrus and Ingrid made their long relationship official in a formal wedding ceremony. More than a decade after they'd first gotten together and roughly 4 years after Tyrus had publicly confirmed they were already married. It's a detail that tends to confuse people at first. How do you get married twice? The most consistent explanation from those close to the couple is that their original marriage years earlier had been a quiet, low-key affair, almost a formality between two people who were already living as husband and wife in every practical sense. The 2024 ceremony was the version they'd chosen to share, the one with family present, the one meant to mark the relationship in front of the people who mattered to them, even if it never became a media spectacle. Not long after that wedding, the family made a significant change, leaving their longtime home in Louisiana for a farm in northern New Jersey. For Tyrus, the move represented something close to relief, a place removed from the noise of television studios and wrestling arenas where he didn't have to perform for anyone. For Ingrid, it was a chance to build a new chapter of her own identity, one that wasn't tied to the same routines and branding she'd built over the previous decade. She's spoken publicly about wanting to grow her business and her personal brand beyond where it started, moving toward new projects in wellness and family health that reflect the life she's living now rather than the one she was surviving through when Sensible Meals began. Their farm has become something of a running joke and a source of genuine joy for the family, home to a rotating cast of reptiles, exotic animals, and whatever creature Tyrus has decided needs adopting next. Their daughter Georgie has taken up horseback riding, and Tyrus has talked about how much pride he takes in showing up to watch her compete, a strikingly ordinary kind of happiness for a man who spent decades being cheered by arenas full of strangers. Ingrid, meanwhile, continues to run her businesses while managing a household that includes 5 children across 2 blended families, a level of daily coordination that gets far less attention than anything either of them does on camera. What makes their story resonate with people isn't really the wrestling titles or the Fox News segments. It's the fact that 2 people who each spent years rebuilding themselves from genuinely difficult circumstances found each other and chose, quietly and repeatedly, to keep building something together. Tyrus went from a kid who felt like he didn't fully belong anywhere to a man who walked away from a wrestling championship because his children wanted him home instead. Ingrid went from a single mother with a sick child and very little financial security to the head of a health and wellness business that's helped countless other families facing the same struggle she once faced alone. Neither of their stories needed the other person to be complete, and maybe that's exactly why the relationship has lasted. They didn't rescue each other so much as recognize each other. 2 people who already knew how to survive on their own and decided they'd rather not have to anymore. For a public figure who built his brand on being loud, blunt, and larger than life, Tyrus has been almost strategically quiet about the most important relationship in his life. He'll mention Ingrid warmly when asked, referring to her at times as the one who runs things, the person keeping the household and the businesses and the animals all functioning at once. But he's never turned their marriage into content the way so many public figures do. Ingrid, for her part, has built a genuinely independent public profile, one that exists because of her own work rather than as an extension of her husband's fame. Fans who follow her Sensible Meals brand or her Rink Routine platform often aren't even thinking about Tyrus at all. They're there for the meal plans and the fitness guidance she spent 2 decades refining. In the end, what fans got when they finally learned who Tyrus had married wasn't a tabloid story. It was something closer to proof that the loudest, toughest guy on television had spent years quietly protecting the softest, most important part of his life. A wife who built her own empire out of hardship, a blended family of 5 kids, and a farm full of animals that has nothing to do with wrestling or cable news at all. Whatever else people remember about Tyrus's career, the ring entrances, the championship belts, the political commentary, the story of how he found and finally married Ingrid Rink might end up being the part of his life that says the most about who he actually is.